Good evening and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. As always, I'm Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical. My guest tonight is my friend and comrade, former co-host, actor, author, and activist. I don't think you're an actor yet. Let me know if that changes. Alex Suarez. How have you been, Alex?
I've been in a play once, but I think I'd be better writing a play than acting in one.
Understand. So what have you been up to?
Well, I'm working on my 16th book right now, but it's only my second fiction ever.
Gotcha.
Fictions are hard to do, especially the type of fictions that I like to do, which is an alternative history to things, because it has to at least partially be based on fact.
Sure.
This is about a figure that I've admired for most of my life, but it requires a lot of research and memorizing things.
And that figure, of course, is Che Guevara, and the name of the book is If Che Won. Is that correct?
That is correct. And a few of my books have been translated to Spanish. The last one, The Diplomat, is actually in the process of getting translated to Italian now, so it can be promoted in Europe. Certainly, I want this book at least translated to Spanish soon after. It's important to Latin Americans who revere Che, who was one of them, one of us.
Yeah.
Read this historical analysis and this alternative history. Just as when I wrote a few books back, If Trotsky Won, that was my only other fiction that I did.
Gotcha.
Other works included semi-autobiographical works, political works, things of that nature. And you'll have to excuse me if my voice is not top notch. I have a little bit of a sore throat, but I was still good enough to come on the air with you, although I won't be on as long as usual, maybe 30, 40 minutes.
I understand.
But there's a couple parts of the book that I'd love to share with you, with everybody.
Well, let's go ahead and start. So the book is about if Che had won. Go ahead and let people know specifically if he had won what.
Right. I'm referring to, obviously, he was, the anniversary was recently, actually, 55 years on October 9th. He was captured October 8th. In 1967, he was assassinated in Bolivia on orders of the CIA. His legacy lives on, but I'm kind of doing an analysis of what I believe what would have happened if he ended up back in Argentina, or if he was successful in Bolivia or successful in neighboring Argentina instead. So what I have written so far, I mean, I've written more than this, but what I've revealed to the public so far in my blog is the intro, and I'll have a section of the chapter 1 I'd like to share. Is it okay I go into that now?
Absolutely.
So, intro to If Che Won. Just as in my 14th book, If Trotsky Won, this, my 16th book, If Che Won, will be one of the few times I write a fiction, but a historical alternative fiction, based in part on fact. I discovered Che as an adolescent, actually before I discovered Trotsky. As a kid, I always admired Robin Hood. Hearing Che described as a Latin Argentine Robin Hood attracted me to him and the Cuban Revolution in general. Cuba has a history of having foreigners or internationalists as revolutionaries. I later found out Maximo Gomez, the first head of state of Cuba, when the Cuban Republic was formed in the early 20th century, after the Spaniards lost their last stronghold, was in fact a Dominican by birth. Maximo led the macheteros, the fighters with machete in hand who scared the Spaniards. The macheteros inspired the idea for the movie Machete, which shows fighters with machete in hand, as well exclaiming, "Revolution." Only with Che, it would be rifles and guns. He said he would go down to the last bullet and kept his word. Before Che was captured in Bolivia in 1967, he emptied his rifle and shot his handgun. He continued to shoot till he was wounded in the legs and his handgun was jammed. Finally, he was captured. This capture on that sad October day October 8th, known as the Day of the Guerrilla in Cuba, was alongside two comrades, his Peruvian Chinese comrade known as El Chino, and the Cuban Rubio Suarez. The remains of the three were sent to Santa Clara, Cuba, where Che had his victory 30 years later after being found buried in a distant part of Bolivia. Only a handful of comrades survived. Che was assassinated the next day, October 9th. I have often thought, as I do about other figures, what if Che survived the Bolivian campaign? What were his plans in Argentina? So I will delve into this project, like always with intellectual honesty, based on a lifelong study of Che's life, and will put what I believe would have happened if Che was able to survive that October and be successful in spreading his revolutionary vision for the continent. I dedicate this book to two individuals. First, Ciro Bustos, a revolutionary comrade of Che from Argentina, often misunderstood, who was with Che in Bolivia. I wrote a book about this before his death in exile in Europe. I also dedicate the book to Che's younger brother, who's still alive, who also wrote a great book on Che, Juan Guevara. Che entered Bolivia in November of 1966 at the age of 38. I'm about to turn 38 myself. I'm 38 now. I'm sad when I see so little I have accomplished for the revolution from within the U.S. empire. But then I remember the words of Che. I will paraphrase here, translated to English. I envy North Americans, for their fight is in the belly of the beast. Our fight is important indeed. Che had many obstacles, times of doubt. He grieved the loss of his mother while fighting in the Congo alongside Lumumba's comrades. He was a man who meant what he said and backed it with action, as all revolutionaries must. Che was known by some to hate Americans, but his grandfather was actually born in the U.S. His great-grandparents went to California during the gold rush. Che, in fact, hated imperialism, and at the time the empire in the region was no longer Spain like it was for Bolivar, but the USA. Che traveled but not seeking wealth like the Spaniards or some of his relatives, but justice, and acquiring justice through revolution towards a socialist society. His legacy lives in the heart of the Latin American left from Bolivia to Cuba, especially the indigenous people he loved, and in my heart, he lives as well. I have been to Venezuela, Cuba, and Peru. Peru, my father's from, but not yet Bolivia next door. I hope this book is translated to Spanish, like some of my others, and I can go to Bolivia and see the steps Che took in those crucial days of 1966-67. Jacksonville, Florida, September 19th, 2022. And I also wanted to, the audio was okay?
Well, I mean, there were some spots where I could tell that your throat was giving you a little trouble, but yeah, no, it sounded pretty solid.
Got to have the revolutionary will.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to go into part of chapter 1.
Fair enough.
Chapter 1, Che in Africa. In 1965, before Che goes to embark on his Congo operation in secret, he writes a farewell letter to his children. He doesn't know if he will ever see them again. And these are his actual words. Dear Hildita, Aledita, Camilo, Celia, and Ernesto, if you read this letter one day, it will mean that I am no longer alive. You will hardly remember me, and the smallest among you will have entirely forgotten me. Your father was a man who acted as he thought best, and who has been absolutely faithful to his convictions. Grow up into good revolutionaries. Study hard to master technique, which gives you mastery over nature. Remember that is the revolution which is important, and that each of us taken in isolation is worth nothing. Above all, be sensitive in the deepest areas of yourselves to any injustice committed against whoever it may be anywhere in the world. It is the most precious quality of a revolutionary. Yours always, my children. I hope to see you again. A big, strong kiss from Daddy. And then I go in to say, Che with a small group of Cubans, although more numerous than what he gets for Bolivia later, decides to join Lumumba's forces in the Congo. Lumumba was assassinated on orders from the CIA 4 years prior to Che's departure to Africa. Che had been as part of his diplomatic missions as the Cuban representative to several African nations, such as Algeria and Egypt, where he meets with Ben Bella and Nasser. The support from Nasser in Egypt is essential to the logistics to the Congo operation. In the Congo, Che has no ambitions for political office, but as part of his internationalist duties, wants Lumumba's leftists to take back control of the Congo from the imperialist-backed forces in the said country. As part of the ongoing Cold War, with revolutions to push back against capitalist imperialism. Che feels the pressure from Maoists and those in the Soviet camp to pick sides, but instead leaves the infighting to embark on his guerrilla struggle in Africa. Che feels at his best when fighting in the struggle. He held different political positions in Cuba after the revolution of 1959, but by 1965 feels his best to fulfill his mission abroad, as what was originally planned when he met Fidel in Mexico back in the 1950s. Che wants in Africa, like in Latin America and much of the Third World, new Vietnams in order to weaken the U.S. empire, still engaged in fighting the Viet Cong guerrillas as part of its efforts to prevent the spread of communist governments in defense of the oppressed and working class throughout the world. So that's the parts. Those are the parts I wanted to share.
Well, and that's pretty much what the struggle, the fight on behalf of the working class across the world. And it has to be international. That's one thing that all the important leaders of the past agreed on. Nobody helped people abroad more than Cuba. Later on, they sent people to Mozambique and Angola to help overthrow the Portuguese. And
the Angolan operation was essential because in Angola, it was a client regime of the South African apartheid regime. The Portuguese were allied with the Dutch and British that were controlling South Africa at the time, especially the British. So at that point, because Fidel's army moved much more powerful than it was in the 1960s, this was the 1970s, he sent tens of thousands of Cuban troops over the course of years in that operation. And that's why one of the first people that Mandela thanked when he was released from prison was Fidel Castro, because he realized that the Cuban intervention, which was an anti-imperialist intervention, was essential to the defeat of the regime in South Africa, which neighbors Angola.
Yep. As an amusing fact, South Africa, of course, was operating as a U.S. surrogate in Angola. They moved in right after we left.
Israel also supported South Africa. They were in the process of giving them some of their nuclear arsenal when finally they were overthrown in South Africa.
Yes, Israel and South Africa were very close. That's one of the reasons that both Mandela and, before he died, and Archbishop Tutu more recently have said flat out that Israel is also an apartheid society.
Well, let's talk about Katie Halper, because Katie Halper is a Jew.
Yes.
She's a progressive.
Yes.
She might not be a full-fledged socialist, but I defend her, and she's principled. She's probably an anti-Zionist Jew. And she came out and simply stated facts, including quoting Tutu, stating facts, saying that Representative Rashida Tlaib was making a point about Zionism and that she shouldn't be called an anti-Semite. And she made this appeal to the Hill that she used to be associated with. And not only did they refuse to release it, they fired her. Yes. How is this not anti-Semitism? That all Jews have to be in line over Israel? What they did against Katie Halper is actually anti-Semitism.
It's absolutely anti-Semitic, because they fired her for being Jewish and not towing their line and speaking out against them.
And also, we should remember that the Semitic people include Maltese, North Africans, Ethiopians, and Arabs, not just Hebrews. Katie Halper is Semitic. She probably has Hebrew roots, but so is Rashida Tlaib. I mean, they're cousins. And actually, for most of history, the Jews and Muslims had more in common than the Christians, and they got along, and they had common enemies. If you see, like during the Crusades or after the Inquisition, when many Muslim countries took in Jews, but the Zionist myths cover up all that history, and they try to make it look like a religious conflict. Zionism uses religion as a means to cover their political agenda.
I'm going to speak out here because it's important to sometimes know the differences in your enemy's theory too. There are two forms of Zionism. The original Zionist movement that Herzl founded was aggressively secular, and was run by secular Jews who were not practicing the religion.
If you actually read Herzl's words, he said in his diary that he wanted his sons uncircumcised.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the guy that said that, started Zionism, but he started it as a political, not as a religious movement. Later, they looked for religious justification with different rabbis. By the way, let's bring it back to Che real quick. Did you know that when Che went to Egypt for the first time, he went to Egypt several times. On his first trip in 1959, when Nasser still had control of Gaza, so there was a part of Palestine that was under Egyptian protection.
Yes.
Che insisted on going to Gaza, and they sent him out. They sent a convoy. There's a picture of Che in Gaza. Che wanted to see Palestine. He admired the Palestinian people. And when you see the protests, against the Zionist regime of Palestinians or other anti-Zionists, they often have the image of Che there. So they remember that.
Oh, yeah.
Yasser Arafat, I'm not going to say Yasser Arafat was socialist, but he definitely associated with the left. He was sort of a progressive.
His
and if you attended an Arafat rally, or what was the name of that Christian guy that was part of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine? But anyways, whenever you join any of those groups that were allied with Arafat and you went to a rally, you'd often see images of Che as well.
That's because at the time, I don't think you can call them this anymore, but at the time, the Arafat's Fatah party was at least officially and on paper socialist, even
they were more in the Soviet camp they were Soviet allies during the Cold War.
And they were a secular socialist party. Arafat was a Muslim. Arafat's wife was a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
The radicalization of Palestine is something that was the radicalization of Palestine towards the fundamentalist Muslim direction, I should say, was something that was done by Hamas very much with the support of Israel originally.
Right, because they thought that they could divide the Palestinian resistance by at least permitting Hamas to rise in Gaza in the 1980s.
Well, what's important to understand is that both the Mossad, who are very much inspired by CIA, and CIA itself are very big on these relationships with very hardcore fundamentalist Muslims, because they're the natural counterweight to any sort of communist movement. So if you wanted to defeat the Fatah specifically and the PLO more generally, which was an agreement between several socialist groups, the PLFP you mentioned, I can't remember all the initials, but the P.
Wasn't it Azmi Bishara, who was the Christian? Was it Bishara? I can Google it. Official leader of the socialist.
I can't remember everybody's name. There was Dr. George Habash.
That's what I meant. Habash. Bishara is he was part of Balad, the Arab party in Israel. Yeah.
Habash was the founder of the. I have so much trouble with the initials, and that's my fault. The PLDFP. I think it's PLDFP.
Mm-hmm.
Popular Democratic Front for Palestine. Yes. No. PDLFP.
It was the Popular Front. I prefer to use the term United Front, but yeah, they were basically socialist leaning, and they worked as part of the PLO with Fatah.
Yes, and a couple of other organizations, and unfortunately, what's left is Fatah, and Fatah has become a sort of an adjunct to whoever is running the Israeli government at the moment, and doesn't really have any power or authority anymore without Israel backing it up, which is kind of sad. What would Arafat think?
Right.
But yeah, no. But yeah, the whole idea that
By
we
the way, he thanked three people, Mandela. He thanked Arafat, he thanked Fidel, and it's important to realize that he thanked Mandela, that he thanked Gaddafi.
yes,
Gaddafi was a big supporter of the Palestinians,
yes,
Africans. Gaddafi, in a way, was an internationalist
yes. Well, he was a Pan-Africanist, definitely.
and a Pan-Arabist at one point too. He worked with Nasser. Nasser
Yes.
was a Pan-Arabist.
Yes. Nasser.
By the way, Che died, and within a few days, the Israeli invasion of the West Bank and Gaza happened. It was October of '67.
Yeah.
So it was all happening around the same time. And a lot of the Palestinians that rose up to try to resist that had the flag of Che, inspired by Che's death as well.
Believe it. You see Che's image everywhere. It's become
French,
very
the French
iconic.
student protests in 1968, the following year, they were all inspired by Che there. Che was fluent in French too.
Believe it. It's good. I wish I was fluent in was still reasonably fluent in Spanish, but I wasn't using it enough, so I lost.
Well, you can always practice it with me. I know some French, but I'm fluent in Spanish.
I'll have to do that one of these days. So Africa, of course, the Congo crisis didn't end up going very well for the Congolese.
Well, actually, it's interesting because there was a president who was one of the guys that fought alongside Che, Kabila.
Yes.
Kabila with a B. Kabila, he was able to become president. He fought alongside Che.
Yes.
Became president of the Congo. And his son, up till recently, was president of the Congo as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that was part of Che's legacy, not just Evo Morales, who was inspired by Che in Bolivia.
Well, and of course, Cuba is part of Che's legacy.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't forget the Cuban part. I mean, Cuba's still defying the United States embargo. They managed to get people through a hurricane with no deaths. You think we could do that in Florida, wouldn't you?
Well, the thing is, there's government negligence because they only think about profit. And, in Southwest Florida, here in Florida, and off the coast of Fort Myers, there was terrible devastation on that island because the government did not order evacuation in time.
Yeah.
This is the negligence of Death Santis, as we call him, also known as DeSantis. Terrible governor, terrible allies in that area. They were very negligent and did not warn the people, even though it was already a Category 3, for God's sakes.
Well, it's just there's such a lax attitude towards disasters in the U.S. A lot of times people say, well, I won't evacuate, I'll ride it out. There were a bunch of people who stayed in Fort Myers Beach on the islands knowing they were, even after they knew they were supposed to evacuate.
Yes, but there's a lot of people that would have left had they got the orders, and they didn't.
That's true.
And so the government should be sued for that, I believe, the state government.
Well, I mean, I will, and maybe this is deliberate on the news coverage's part. You never know, but they were talking to a guy who said, "And why did you stay? Did they not let you know in time?" Like, well, no, we knew. We were told to evacuate here the week before. It was Lee County next to us. They hadn't told to evacuate yet, but I stayed because I'm just dumb. And he said it just like that he said he stayed, he shouldn't have. The next county over hadn't gotten the warning, and he had passed it along to some friends of his over there, but he had stayed even after his friends left Lee County. And it didn't go well. He was stuck without power and trapped by flooding and all sorts of terrible stuff. They had to take him out of his house in the chair on the helicopter,
DeSantis loves those type of stories because that puts the blame off him and his allies.
Oh, sure. I'm sure he does.
And it's interesting because I had a show was going to come on with a comrade. I eventually went on. He's North Carolina. I had a friend who lives in South Florida, drove North Carolina, just so that it would become an increased storm after Jacksonville, Category 1. My friend North Carolina lost power, so I had lost power, couldn't come on the show. A few days passed. I was about to go on his show. He lost power from the same storm. So the hurricane messed up 2 shows for me.
And how classic is that? Is that the path takes it out over the ocean again, and it picks up power and becomes a hurricane all over again before it hits North Carolina.
Yeah, that's what happened with Georgia. And there was a storm. I'm trying to remember the name. It was 2017, and it wasn't a storm. It was a hurricane. It covered almost the entire state at the same time. And when it finally left Florida, it got to southern Georgia where mother lives, and they lost electricity and water too. So people think it leaves Florida and it goes away. No, it does damage to the Carolinas, to Georgia, neighboring states.
Sometimes though, when it leaves overland, it usually continues to lose gas, becomes a tropical storm, and breaks down the further inland it gets. And if it hits mountains or anything like that, like when they come up into Tennessee from North Carolina, which happens sometimes, they break up over the mountains.
The Appalachia stops it.
Though you sometimes get very serious wind and rain and thunderstorms in those mountains where it breaks up. But
Speaking of Appalachia, Zaina told me, I mean, it's not official yet, but we're allowed to talk about it, that she's thinking about starting a Camp Dada in Appalachia. I would totally support that. I hope we don't just do it in New York. We should do it in the South, too.
Well, I mean, I think that the more different places that people can go camp, eventually the more people will be able to get there. It's like there was no way I could travel to the East Coast.
Yeah, I wanted to do like a Seminole themed one on the Florida Keys. But if they had one in the Pacific Northwest, that'll be closer to you too.
But that same Saturday, we went out and spent Saturday night and part of Sunday with friends who were camping not far from here. So we got a little of that in.
The same Saturday that we were at camp when I went to Camp Dada?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't know.
Yeah, it wasn't a big thing, but we went there Saturday night and came back on Sunday.
I'll tell you, I've not had good luck with health the past 2 months. I'm usually very healthy. No, I am usually very healthy. But I had the chiggers that gave me terrible rash from the trip. And now I got this throat issue. But hopefully it'll be gone within a couple of days. October's my birthday month, so I don't want it all screwed up. Hopefully by Halloween I'm ready to go out and dress up and have a good time again.
I certainly understand. I used to really enjoy Halloween, and then somewhere along the line, I just didn't have the energy anymore.
Well, you're older. I mean, you're not. I'm 38. You're in your 40s?
Yeah, I'm 45.
Oh, okay.
Isn't
that a type of gun?
Oh, what was that?
Isn't there a type of gun called the 45?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of 45 caliber.
Well, there's a 38 and a 45 caliber. That's us. High caliber guys, right?
But I mean, I've been pretty healthy, physically anyway. A lot of stress lately, but that's just the way it goes right now.
Physically, I was fine all summer. I'm usually fine physically. It's just past couple months. Also, the weather gets cold. When it gets colder,
yeah,
sometimes things develop. Colder, not cold like the Northeast, but you know.
I know. Nothing's well. I mean, if you've been in Boston, you used to live in Boston, so I know there's nothing in Florida like Boston.
Well, I was in North Dakota in the winter too. That was like
that's pretty.
That was Arctic cold. Yeah.
I've never been to North Dakota in the winter. I've been to Boston.
The hills. The air just comes in at 50 below zero. There's no hills to stop it in North Dakota.
It was in the winter when I was in Boston, though I was only there long enough to meet friends at the bus station and go to Cape Cod with them.
Oh. Well, I think it's time for me to go, brother. I need to.
I understand. I appreciate you.
Myself.
I appreciate you giving us a couple chapters of the book.
But if people want to read stuff that I have out now, they can read The Diplomat that came out a couple months ago about the Alex Suarez case.
Yes.
And also, if they cash at me, and maybe after the show you can put the Cash App info in the description. I'll send them a signed copy. I already have a supporter that sent me a picture with my book that I put up, that I signed and inscribed to them in exchange for the Cash App. So if people don't want to give money directly to Amazon, they can DM me and we can make an arrangement. And they can just, if I see they Cash App me, if they DM me their address and their name, happy to send it to them. I can order myself as an author.
And his Twitter's right there in the window, folks. So I want to thank you for joining me, Alex. I appreciate it. I'm sorry you're not feeling well. I hope you feel better. Have a great night.
Peace out.
Have a good one. So I don't have a monologue. I am going to go ahead and end the show in a moment or two, but I do want to say that I hope everybody else is hanging in there and that you're feeling okay. I know it's tough sometimes. I have issues with my mental and emotional health from time to time, and I know I'm not the only one. I see stuff from people on social media, both, what they actually say in public and sometimes what people say in private. And I know I'm not the only one who gets worn down. I just hope you're all okay, because we can do this. We can help each other out. We've just got to hang in there and let each other know. And so keep that in mind. Keep that in mind tonight. Keep that in mind during the day tomorrow, the rest of the week. I'll see you next week. Hopefully we'll have a longer show. And I hope everybody has a great night. I hope if you've been struggling like me, I hope you feel better. If you've been sick like Alex, I hope you feel better. And, if everything's good, I'm really happy for you. And I'm glad. And hey, help us out with some of that positivity sometimes, and we'll remember when you're down. And everybody, I love you. And you guys have a great night. Thanks. I'll tweet at you.